freedom is bliss. Freedom is bliss. That's the next phase of our entire evolution. We've been learning from suffering, right? And suffering is deep and beautiful and painful and rich, and it has layers and layers and so many lessons and learnings for us. And we've almost exhausted it, right? And when we've exhausted it, which is soon, the next universe opens for us, and the next universe is bliss. And you might think bliss is just one thing, but bliss is as rich and wide and infinite as suffering. Bliss has so many layers and vibrations and frequencies and colors and sounds, and so we get to explore an eon of bliss. And that's freedom.
Richard Rudd is a teacher, a mystic, and the first student of the Gene Keys. The Gene Keys are a living wisdom, and I believe that every so often, every millennia, an individual or a group of individuals come onto planet Earth in order to bring through a much needed message and new paradigm for humanity. And that's exactly what Richard has done in his life's work. And we're going to unpack today what it really means to live our purpose, what it means to embody our gifts, and to understand a little bit about our shadow side. Because Richard was able to tap into the infinite field of consciousness toward the end of his 20s when he underwent a intense spiritual awakening, an experience that he calls tapping into a field of limitless light, where he had access to all dimensional information. And it took him a while to unpack what went through in that experience that lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. A very mystical, transformational experience that Richard was ready for because there was a message in there. And he was able to unpack that message into what we see here, the Gene Keys. Pretty fat book. But it's more than a book. It's a spiritual companion for your life. It's a teaching that allows you to get to know yourself on a much deeper and boundless nature. So I wanted just to let you guys know that the messages that are coming through in this episode are to be contemplated, are not to be listened to in a very fast pace and just thrown away after you listen to it. Sit with these teachings, sit with this episode, and you'll start to begin to see how the lessons and teachings that Richard is coming through are going to unlock very special things within you and are going to change not only your internal, but your external world. So I honor you for being here, and I really hope you enjoy this episode with a mystic of our modern time, Richard Rudd. Richard Rudd, welcome to the podcast. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Hi, Emilio. Lovely to be here. Well, I think I'm just excited and enthused about life itself. I mean, I'm one of the strange people in the world who sees a great future, and so I'm feeling very enthused about that future. In fact, last night I had a powerful dream where I saw that future, and it was really golden. And it's so, this is an imprinting that I carry, and it's part of my message. So I sometimes say I'm a bringer of good news.
I love that. When you're training Gene Key ambassadors, well, you don't really call them teachers because this is a path of self-illumination, but you walk these ambassadors through 8 treasures, and the first treasure is the Conch shell. And you said that for millennia, the Conch has been used as a means of calling on the power of the collective. It was used particularly for calling together armies as they went into battle. You are also using this symbol of the conch to carry in an army of spiritual warriors armed with virtues and carrying the shields of benevolence, ready to transform the shadows of the world, the collective shadows of the world. If you had a conch right now in your hand, how would you begin to call in your army of spiritual warriors? Oh, he's pulling out the conch. Hey.
Yeah. It is a great symbol. The shell that has kind of sat at the bottom of the ocean for kind of a long, long time. And then, I remember as a child, my mother this very conch actually used to give it to me as I was a little boy in the bath. And she said, hold it up to your ear and you can hear the sea. And so I love that you brought back that story. And because it is definitely the time of the calling of the clans, or the quickening of the higher consciousness. And that's a powerful time, because that radiance of what's coming is calling people together around, a new storyline for humanity. And even as old ways are beginning to crumble and cracks are forming and trauma is coming out in deeper and will continue to come out in deeper and probably more shocking ways, at the same time as this conch call to beings who've come here to preside over this great change, this time of momentous change, and it's going to be over generations. It's like everyone always wants to know when it is, and it is not a kind of moment. It's like it's a generational, it's a transgenerational change. Evolutionary changes take time, and even ones as quick as this one is going to be will take generations. So we're all part of it. We're all here to serve it in different ways. Even the old consciousness is also serving it. Even the shadow consciousness is serving. Even the stress is serving the change. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's certainly what came out.
Yeah, and from the context of evolution, because really what I believe the gene keys is these algorithms of awakening, as you've said, and truly a guidebook, a transmission of evolution. And you've mentioned before that there are species that undergo cellular mutations, and usually these happen after like cataclysmic events in the history of that species. For example, a species may grow wings after they were drowned in a flood or something like that, just as an example, like the dragonfly that you mentioned a lot in the book. What is this cellular mutation that is undergoing right now in the human race, and how can we begin to start awakening to it and becoming part of that consciously?
Yeah, I think it's to do with this notion of the biome and the notion of the interconnectivity of all life, which more and more is being explored through science now, and biology and physics, and through entanglement and all these different theories that are coming out. But they all point towards the underlying interconnectivity between all life forms. And we haven't lived like that in the past 500 years or so, or perhaps even going further back. For some time we now have been living as separate, as though we were separate, and obviously that is having its impact on the world around us. So what's coming back is this powerful interconnectivity that is networking all species together, but also not just we look at our chain of evolution here on the earth and we see humans perhaps at the pinnacle of that evolution, even though there may be species who seem wiser than us. There also are species beyond us who we can't necessarily see, who exist in higher dimensional realities. And so how do we shift from this one to that one? And that's that will require some massive change in our cellular structure, in our being. And you're right, the crisis often precedes massive, flourishes of biodiversity. So after, like, the dinosaurs were wiped out, for example, where the world was mostly populated by ferns and things. After that came like a reset, and then suddenly burgeoned all this life, all these deciduous trees and new plants and species, and multicolored, and birds appeared, and all these, so massive biodiversity comes after huge trauma. And I'm not suggesting that you have to have it that way, but it is a powerful message, I think, for our times. And it doesn't mean that we kind of have to kind of not do anything, just go, oh, well, we'll just sit back and wait for it all to collapse. It means that we have to engage fully with the process, and with our own awakening. And that means we have to find that inside ourselves. We have to go inside. We have to take an interior journey that puts us in touch with a part of us that's beyond fear. Because a lot of fear will come out at times of crisis and trauma and war and, uncertainty and, what's coming in this planet, like massive water shortages and all kinds of problems, and that are going to, because we're all interconnected, it's going to kind of be exacerbated by our behavior, by continuing in the way we are. And it doesn't look like we're going to stop, not for a while. So the journey, really, the powerful journey, is to go within and to find inside us, especially deep in our belly, which is where the biome lives in us. Deep in our belly is where we find that interconnectivity with all life. And the ancients have always held, that the belly is the seat of the soul. It's the belly is the where the navel is, where we appeared in the world. That is the source. That is the wormhole of creation. That is, it's in there, deep in the center of our being, that light streams forth from that point. And as we drop deeper into our belly and into the base of who we are, and we find that core place of silence and transcendence, then we come into alignment with all that is. We come into alignment and balance, and we find deep stability in our being. And that's what we need at times of intense change. We need deep core stability, so that we can hold our focus, as we move forward through times of change. So, yeah, the change, it will come, I'm sure, as a cellular change in our species over a period of hundreds, if not thousands of years, as children come into the world carrying slightly different variations. And that might well enable us, well, I suspect it will enable us to access a higher awareness system that's always been there, but it's an upgrade, I guess you could say. It's time for an upgrade. And so looking at the scope of what's happening on the planet right now, you could look at it in that way, that we are coming towards a time of an upgrade in our biocircuitry. And that's why I'm enthused and excited. I'm also very realistic about what it's going to take.
Yeah.
But we really need to find that place of inner connection in our hearts and in our belly, so that we can withstand, we can stand in the whirlwind, that's coming, and not be freaked out, that we can be strong for each other and take care of each other, whatever happens. Sounds kind of like I'm being quite dramatic, but there we are.
Well, this life is a drama, essentially. It could also be a comedy. And when you were 29, how do we put this lightly? You basically took the red pill and you were out of the matrix for 3 days. and 3 nights, and you began to sort of come into this collective field of intelligence, maybe the quantum field, where you could access all information, all knowledge throughout, the cosmos. And you begin to draw in these understandings and insights about the mathematical codes of this fractal universe. And that is what essentially became the book, The Gene Keys, which are 64 genetic codes, spectrums of human consciousness. And it took you 7 years to integrate and distill all that wisdom. And I know you're still uncovering so many things, coming up with new sequences. I think the latest may have been the Rebirth sequence that you were exploring with Rodrigo Niño, another fellow Colombian. And just to start, you mentioned that during that, let's say, download awakening, the initial one that you had, you realized that light comes out of our DNA, and that these enlightened states, you've called them the siddhis, are within our DNA, and they come out, not something that, we believe a monk goes to the mountains and then gets enlightened from something outside and suddenly he's illuminated. But you're saying that our genetic code holds the potential for illumination. What were some insights that you gained during those downloads, the initial ones that you had?
Yeah, I think, it's like when you get into the core of the matrix and you start traveling through these, like you said, the fractal universe and the hologram of existence, you understand, like, at the level of wisdom, which is different from knowledge. So it's very difficult to then put it into knowledge and language and words that are built on, certain brain language, the way the brain works, so that we understand things. Even sentence construction, is difficult to describe wisdom experiences or experiences of pure revelation. And in a way, poetry gets closer, or music gets closer, and other creative expressions. So I kind of have to tread carefully, trying to describe those things, but and I've done my very best in the book to kind of tread along the banks of the poetic, but yet also the systematic understandings of the patterning of the universe and consciousness itself. Because that's, for me, I experienced it in my DNA, in the spiral helixes of DNA itself, and the numbering systems, of the encodements of our DNA. We're just a mathematical cosmos in here. And I'm not even a mathematician. I was never even that great at maths. But I loved moving through the mathematical substructures of the cosmos and the patterns that just endlessly ripple through that. And ever since that was revealed to me, I've continuously played with the treasure box of magic and the sequences and the algorithms and the understandings that have come out and continue to come out about how consciousness awakens, unravels, arrives on the planet, leaves the planet in these steps, stages, sequences, algorithms, logarithms, and how everything is encoded to a degree of impeccable perfection that is mind-blowing. And so when you enter into that, when you imbue that perfection, and you come back into the human world, you're like, wow. You have the new age kind of thing that I used to hear when as I was kind of waking up was like, everyone used to go, it's all perfect. Don't you see? It's all perfect. And it was like a real one-liner that kind of was hard, because you'd look around and you see, well, that kid down there drowning is not perfect. Those, you'd look and this is not perfect. Mm-hmm. But actually, from the level at the human level, you would see that. But at the divine level, you'd see that there are storylines and algorithms even in those very difficult dramas that are being played out here. And so, in a way, what you're looking at, what I understood, and for what the Gene Keys kind of represent, is the workings of karma itself, of the playing out of the themes that connect us to our ancestry, but also connect us to our future successors, through time and space. So, when you weave this strand of the memory, because the DNA holds the key to memory, then you can literally travel down one of those strands and you can unravel an entire story. And there are almost infinite strands. And so you're really entering into, as you say, the matrix. So the question is, like, why? I mean, some of the great masters have always said, when people have asked them, why don't we see what you see? And they say, and they often answer, because you would go mad. Because imagine if you could see all the stories and all the webs and threads at once, how would your mind or the circuitry of your brain hold that? So in a way, what happens is you can travel down the specific one that you need to at any time. So, but in order to do this, you have to do a lot of inner work. You have to do this shadow work, because it's all made up of, that you have to meet these difficult places as you go inside, and you keep meeting them. And they're places of, cross where consciousness crosses over itself, or kind of, there's a dissonance or an interference frequency that you meet, and we experience that as a pain or a trauma or something specific to our childhood, or even to a past life, or to a memory in our racial gene pool, in our lineage somewhere. And all of this has to be traveled for our consciousness to kind of expand and get back to its source. It's like the salmon, going back to the source. As they come from the ocean and they swim up the river, and they swim up this incredible, they make this incredible journey until they get back to the place where they were born. Yeah. And then they lay their eggs, and that's exactly the same with the journey of awakening.
Huh. In that experience that you had, and you've had others as well, where you were in those realms, would you describe it as being back, like, quote, in that home, that source where we all came from?
I mean, I've definitely had moments of that. I think in the experience that you're referring to, those 3 days, it was kind of, it was so overwhelming that there were only moments where I felt that, because it was so overwhelming for my human psyche.
Did you eat in those days?
No, I didn't eat. I drank a lot of water. I had to drink a lot of water, and it seemed to just evaporate. The more water I put in, it just kind of evaporated through me. I didn't eat. No. It's like, there was a part of me that was just going, eat?
What is that?
Because the light was just pouring in. That was the food. That was the nourishment. And and I understood that. I understood why people can enter into long fasts, and why perhaps in the past or in the future people would be able to exist. The body would be able to exist on light, because that is our primary fuel, and I do see that in the times ahead, but perhaps the further future. I think many of us kind of have an intuition about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know in your purpose, you have the 64th gene key, which sort of encapsulates all of the gene keys at once. And just to give people an understanding of the gene key, there is obviously 64. That's coming from sacred geometry, sacred numerology, the I Ching in China, but also you were kind of gifted this purpose to understand and traverse through all 64 gene keys. Have you ever questioned, I'm sure after having that experience and writing the gene keys and downloading all that information, you said you had the denial phase, the Messiah phase. Have you had a clear understanding now of why you were chosen to receive this transmission at this time in humanity?
Yeah, I think I've put together the pieces of the puzzle, or quite a few of them by now, because I've had time, and so a lot of different experiences have arrived over the time since I've been unraveling that have helped me to understand, why this has happened. And it's part of my soul journey of memory, actually, because there were pieces that I didn't see even in that exalted state, that I have seen now, some. And there's still pieces that I don't understand because they kind of defy our understanding. Like one of the things that came to, my actual purpose, Gene Key, is timelessness. My life's work is 64, you're right. And so timelessness gave me that experience of memory moving forwards in time and backwards in time as well. So I remembered things in the future and I remembered things in the past until the future and the past had just kind of formed a circle. And it was, and I, it's difficult to explain, but like, and within that, I'm like, I felt like if I inhabited that state for a long time, I would have been able to look into specific future memories or past memories and see all the details that I wanted to see. As it was, I was only seeing kind of random things that I was supposed to see. And so I had snatches of things, although some of them were big. Like the dream I had last night, for example, which seemed topical.
Let's get into that, Richard.
The dream I had last night, and I'm not a massive dreamer. Some people have very rich regular dreams, and when they do come to me, it's powerful. And so anyway, this one woke me up right in the middle of the night because it was one of those powerful dreams, and I was being shown the universe, the solar system. Almost as though it was on YouTube. Wow. And I was being shown it and I was going, oh, what is that? What is that? And then this sort of, I guess the knowing voice that wasn't really a voice said, it's your solar system. And I was like, wow, but it's spiraling, the whole thing. You should know that's the galaxy. That's the whole galaxy. And the whole thing was like a corkscrew with all the turning and all the details of all the stars and the planets and the exoplanets and everything. And they were all contained in this one spiral movement. And as I was watching it, there was a sudden explosion, a flash that was so bright that I had to look away. And this was in my dream. And it hurt my eyes. I remember in my dream going, this. It hurt my eyes and I had to look away because it was so bright. And then when I looked back, it basically a supernova had occurred. But it was like a supernova of an entire galaxy. And it remained this very, very, very bright light that had taken over half of the screen, and it was still there, but it wasn't the intensity of the explosion that was too bright to look at. It was now just really, really, really bright. This huge, like the whole galaxy was one massive shining light. And so as soon as I asked the question, it was answered almost instantaneously. What was that?
that sort of what just happened? Hold on a minute.
WTF? So it was like that. And it was really clear that is what's coming, for our species and our universe. And because everything is interconnected. So like for one species to go through a quantum leap, it means so many other interconnected species have to go through also quantum leaps. So everything is interconnected. Like it's the same as in the biome and on our planet. It's the same at a quantum level. Everything is interconnected. So what I saw was that our cosmos or our solar system or our sun or our Earth, they get to a certain point in space. And when they reach that point, that's when it happens. That's when that explosion happens. And it happens under great stress. Yeah, tipping point. Huh. And it happens under huge stress. If you think about that, like the amount of stress that must be there in that singularity for that supernova to happen. There's a real intensity in the whole system, and it's terrifying basically in some way. Yeah. But then it yields. Then it's suddenly, there's a big bang, and all that pressure and energy is released. and then you have a rebirth, basically. Anyway, so that was my dream. You're the first person I shared it with. So
we need to make that into a movie, Richard.
yeah.
A documentary. But I was just thinking, that got me feeling into when we incarnate right now in this time in humanity, we go through this veil of forgetfulness. A lot of traditions have called it the Maya, and we sort of forget why we chose to incarnate, and then throughout this life we're playing the game and learning our lessons and going into the shadow, releasing the gift. When people are in this forgetfulness, what would you sort of tell them to remind them why they chose to incarnate at this point in humanity? Because as you said, this is a tipping point. This is one of the most important times in this species history, maybe. Why did we choose to incarnate right now?
Well, it's like, you go out to the ocean and, you're watching the surfers out there sometimes, or maybe you are one of them. And occasionally you just get one of these massive storms where the swell is so huge that, you can't surf it. Although, and it's too dangerous. But there's always a small band of people who are waiting for that day because that's their specialization, big wave surfing, and they have special boards and they practice and that's their day. And in a way, that's if you're born now, you are a specialized big wave surfer, and you need to kind of understand that, and you need to get in practice for that if you're not already, which means you have to do this inner work, which is intense. There's an intensity to a time like this, to be able to encompass what's happening to humanity and not be distracted by all the kind of, I guess I call them the spokes of the wheel. Just, you need to be looking at the hub and focused on the hub. Like if you're out there on those waves, when they come, if you are not 100% focused, on the wave and on your board and on the energy underneath you, you're going to die. And so it's, in a way, for us, we have to really do that inner work so that we can find these places inside us of deep grounding, of deep trust. Trust is a really good word, actually. It's not a word that's in the gene keys. It's a word that surrounds the gene keys. It's not one of the gene key words, but it sort of envelops the whole thing. And we have to find that level of trust and truth that kind of exists deep inside us, so that we can, thrive during these times. And so there's a lot of creativity that's coming, that's available to us, and creativity is I think it's misunderstood in a way, because it's one of the main engines of transformation, of inner transformation. So there are so many creative outlets that can transform the difficulties that we experience in our life. So any problem that you're facing, or that you feel called to address in the world, externally or internally, it requires a creative genius to solve the problem. So you have to think in a completely new way, and you have to connect with people who are completely on your wavelength, who you feel are aligned with you, and form these groupings, these families, these soul families, or whatever you want to call them, these fractal families that have come together through time and space. Find your people and start solving some of the problems that are around us, and prepare for, a simpler way of living. We're going to have to live in a lighter way. We're going to have to live differently. We're going to have to live, with a lot less comfort. So it's good to kind of understand that now and get used to it, so that, we live in a lighter way, and then, then we're also, of course, helping the planet as well. But we're also tending to our own consciousness. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And you mentioned the topic of creativity, because it's also fascinating right now. As a species, we're starting to unlock and tap into this power of artificial intelligence. And I've been playing a lot around with, for example, ChatGPT, and how I can use it as a tool and harness it to make my creativity exponential in many ways. And, I'm still playing around with it. And I think right now humanity's kind of tinkering with it, and we need to be really careful where we tread with that technology. Would you happen to know if these higher evolved species have had access to this technology, and maybe how they're able to harness it and use it in their own way?
Well, you might, one thing you might say is that AI level of creativity is a reflection of a higher intelligence, because it is our higher intelligence. It's not the actual machine itself, but the algorithms that explore new possibilities, and you can never exhaust the algorithms.
Yeah,
they're infinite. They're infinite combinations. So, in a way, what's of value though, and what's really important is, and it's great to play with those things, and as you say, enhance our own creativity. The most important point, though, is that in creativity, it's not the result that's important. It's the process. So that's the thing with AI. It's like it's instant, as far as we can tell. And so, there's some creativity in programming, for sure. But it's like the process of creating something ourselves, for example, with our own hands. That process involves struggle and resistance, boredom, rhythm, routine, flow, breakthrough. It requires a lot of different states to be navigated. And all of those states are alchemical states. They're part of the alchemy of us transmuting lower aspects of our consciousness into higher aspects. So that's how I see creativity, as like it's the process that's more important than the result. The result is, it can be enjoyed, or it might never be seen. There are musicians and artists, composers, and who've created art that is off the charts in terms of genius, and it's never been seen. It was either instantly destroyed by a fire, or someone, or they threw it away or burnt it or something. So there are actually, it doesn't have to be seen or witnessed. It's beautiful if it is, but it's not essential. The essential is the process, because the process is alchemy, and alchemy is what takes us. It's what makes us it's what makes us divine in a way. It's what makes us the creator, one with the creator. So that's a real empowering thing. And I really recommend people, especially young people, really embrace the creative path and all its steps and stages, which are so juicy. And I got a new friend actually, Rick Rubin, who's a music producer, very famous actually.
Yeah.
And he's written this wonderful book on creativity, The Creative Act, I think it's called. And he's distilled all his, decades of kind of surrender into the creative process, into these wonderful nuggets for artists, musicians, creators at any level. I really enjoy it, actually. I recommend it. And, I find that to be like a real key for the next stage of humanity. I think once we have moved past this trauma stage, that's actually what we become. We become the creative children of the future. And that's what we are. We become creators.
Wow.
We co-create the earth, the next earth, the new earth. We're going to co-create it with the consciousness of all creatures kind of moving through us. And that's really the purpose, is to beautify. The purpose of all this is to beautify consciousness, earth itself, to make it even more beautiful. And so we're all become poets, artists, musicians. That's actually, I think that's going to be the future.
Yeah, we
We'll
all
be
have
sitting
an
around
artist
playing
within
harp.
us. Uh-huh. Wow.
At some level.
Wow. That's a
And sometimes,
beautiful.
sometimes it's purely internal. Sometimes even on our inner journey, we find a creative process that's completely internal. Something beautiful that we unlock, and the inner planes that's only for us, that's completely private, that can never be communicated because it's completely for us. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to realize as well. If you're a contemplator, like I am.
Yeah, I resonate so much with that vision, the art of contemplation. And you mentioned this this process of creativity. And I once heard on another podcast where someone asked the guest, is it about the journey or the destination? And as you would say, it's about the process, it's about the journey. And then the guest said, it's neither. It's about the company, it's about the people. And this brings us straight into the Venus sequence, because the Venus sequence within the Gene Keys, the hologenetic individual chart, we each have a sequence for love and relationships and how we deal with our core wounding. And you mentioned that there's 6 essential core wounds of humanity, from repression, anger, shame, rejection, guilt, isolation. And I'd love to get into this topic of the core wound, because then that affects how we attract people into our life, our attractor field. But how can we start understanding where our core wounds come from and begin to start seeing them from a new level?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Emilio. I think the fact that even just open to the fact that you have a core wound is a powerful thing. And wound is not a nice word, no one really wants to kind of go there. But actually, in a way, if you call it the sacred wound, because that's what it is, it's the sacred wound. And in a way, it's been there since the beginning. It has to be there, because if you don't have a wound, you don't have a story. If everything's perfect from the beginning, what's the point? You're sitting around in heaven, but there's no story. There's nothing to overcome. There's no story of transcendence. So the wound was there from the very moment, of the beginning of the universe. In fact, the beginning of the universe was the wound. It was
singularity.
Imprinted. Exactly, and it was imprinted in everything, in every piece. Everything, dark matter, the whole thing, atoms, everything is imprinted with this wound, and the wound is the longing for the parts of the whole to return to the wholeness again. That's it. It's like the shattering of the Big Bang, and then there's like this longing of every atom and everything has to then go on a journey to get back to the whole, to realize where it came from, like the salmon again. So we all have these stories embedded in us, these algorithms of the core wound. And in terms of the gene keys, if you explore your Venus sequence, you get to see your wound map. As you said, it's like this is your specific map of the algorithms through love. It's your journey through love, through the garden of love, and it will show you some of the twists and turns of your journey and how it imprinted your childhood. And how those layers of defense and wounding kind of crept in there without you realizing. And then you get to see them, and then you get to watch them play out in your relationships, and maybe not all your relationships, but in the difficult ones, you get to see them writ large. You really see them. And then in seeing them, you begin to forgive yourself, and you begin to change the patterns and break open those patterns of defense and blame, and whether it's anger or betrayal or whichever side of the game you're on, whether you're the betrayed or the betrayer, or the blamed or the blamer, or whichever, maybe you're the obsessive, maybe you're the whichever one you are, whichever pattern you're playing out, rejection, abandonment, the ones you mentioned.
Mine is anger and denial.
Okay.
in my code.
Isolation as well. You know, they're all kind of isolating. So they all have their patterns and encodements. So understanding your own wound pattern can be a really profound thing, because it allows you to forgive yourself, and it allows you to kind of understand your unconscious behavior when you feel threatened, or when your ego is pushed, or when your sense of security or safety, or is someone pushes up against it in some way and provokes you. You get to see it playing out. And so it's really powerful, because you can then wrap your heart around it, go through a process, a journey, which requires support, I would say. It requires, because it's about dealing with trauma, and trauma is real, it's physical. And the Venus sequence teaches us that these are physical algorithms embedded in the cells of our body, of our organs, in a matrix, right? So, and they're very real, like Eckhart Tolle calls it the pain body, right? Yeah. And that's what you're looking at through the Venus sequence, your specific pain body and its journeys. And they emerge in a sequence. And what's beautiful about the sequence is that you can travel the sequence in reverse. So you can see this wound pattern playing out, and that, and then you can disable it. And then you see a deeper one at the emotional level playing out, and then you, over time, can disable that. And then an even deeper one right into the physical structure that often can cause, for instance, health issues. And you can disable those as well. And the whole journey is a journey of contemplation and inquiry. It requires gentleness and patience, infinite almost, in order that we can begin to kind of, pull out these difficult weeds that have gathered in there, and then as we pull them out, our life changes, our relationships change, our attractor field changes. So we attract different kinds of relationships. The old patterns stop playing out. So we stop having that pattern, that very difficult pattern where I keep meeting that person and the same thing happens, and we end up split up and everyone's, unhappy. So we transform those patterns. That's the alchemy of the Venus work. And then we end up with different people they're souls who are also doing the same work. So we attract people who've done the same level of work as us. And so relationships get easier and more loving and more forgiving.
Yeah.
So it's quite a journey, that one.
Richard, I'm curious how you mentioned the attractor field, how your attractor field has shifted and changed as you started looking into your patterns, your wounds, and what types of people and your spiritual army are you attracting in right now, because you shifted those shadows into the gift.
Yeah. Well, my attractor field, the gene key there is 35, and 35 is at the shadow. It's a restless energy. It's very restless. It won't settle. It's never satisfied in some way. And so that's the story of kind of my early relationships, like never quite finding the right one, the right thing, the right feeling that I knew I kind of was looking for. And so manifesting that over and over and over again, until I began to realize and change my attitude, and then the gift of that, that hunger, the shadow is hunger. The gift of that is this incredible energy of adventure. So to realize that life is an adventure, that relationships are an adventure, that even the difficulties are adventures, and that changes your attitude, because then you realize that actually I don't have to find the perfect relationship. I just have to realize that the one I have drawn in is an adventure, and I'm going to enter into it in an adventurous spirit instead of this kind of, it's not fulfilling me. That whole mindset changed for me, and it took a long time. And I've worked out a lot of that through in my marriage and my close friends, and some of my business partnerships as well, even over the years, have been about letting go and moving on to brighter stages. And then the highest state is boundlessness. It's this sense that anything is possible. And I feel that more and more now because I can tune into that in me. I know that boundlessness. And I've shaken loose a lot of those shadow patterns. There's still some there. And recently I kind of came to a place of, and many people might also kind of come to this place. It's very valuable heart discovery, very vulnerable actually. And it's the place of a little boy inside me saying, am I really allowed to have it all? It's like, am I really allowed to have the boundlessness? Really? Can I have, I can have
worthy of it.
I can have that, and I can have that. I can have anything I want. Really? So I can have the perfect love, and I can have the perfect this, and can I really have it all? And that's what the heart, we have to give ourselves permission to say yes. We go, yes, you can have it all. Whatever your all is. And, and it's not necessarily a Lamborghini and those things. It's like, because the heart doesn't care about those things. The heart, it actually just wants love. Yeah. And it wants to feel love, and it wants to feel love shared, and it wants to feel community and love all around itself, and the possibility of love as service, to be of that's the highest form of love in a way. The love that wants to be of service to the whole. And when we unlock that, then the love, then you really get to the boundlessness, because you're like, well, I want to be of more service. How can I be of more service to the whole? Please let me be of more. That was my prayer for years. Please let me be of more service to the whole. For years and years, it's still my prayer in a way. And that selfless prayer kind of, or incantation or statement to the universe is for all of us. We all have to make that statement. Our heart makes that statement in every beat. And I think that's what brings us, complete fulfillment through the heart. Love, unconditional love.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it, brother.
You too.
Thank you. I heard you mention a concept or a word called the terton, who is someone who has surrendered their small self or ego to a higher teaching in order that teaching can be fully embodied and manifest as compassionate action in the world. So I just wanted to mention you are the living example of a terton. And it's beautiful to see all the work that you're doing in the world. Just to stay on that topic of the attractor field for a moment, I was just looking at my chart, and in that position I have the 42.3, the shadow of expectation, gift of detachment, and then the city of celebration. And I read expectation, and I'm like, that's exactly what we do in relationships. Like we set expectations on people, and then a lot of people, what they do now, and I've done this for a lot of my relationships, is that I don't want to set an expectation because of the fear of being disappointed from that person or that situation. Mm-hmm. So how can people navigate this? I guess this is sort of a gene key that represents a lot. That's why I brought it up, because I don't want to go specifically into my chart. I just want to bring up that collective energy of the 42 of expectation. Yeah.
It reminds me of when I was in my 20s, I was on a kind of interfaith kind of forum, with people from all sorts of different faiths and religions and backgrounds and spiritual beliefs. And I remember a Hindu from India coming, and he brought this question to the group, and he said, I am taught to be detached. I'm taught that detachment is the great goal of my religion, of my spiritual path. And he said, and I can't do it because I love my wife and my children too much. There's no way I could ever be detached in my love from them. And I always remember him saying it, that level of authenticity, of saying that. And so I totally understand what you're saying. The expectation is so painful because we get hurt and then we get disappointed, and we're like, and it happens several times. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm just not going to play that game anymore. It's just, so you have these relationships that are kind of neutral,
Yeah. We're scared to go too deep because we don't want to get hurt.
Exactly. And what is that? That's like a half-hearted relationship. You know, so in order to get to detachment, you have to kind of fully give in to expectation. You know, you have to actually exacerbate it. You have to go, well, I do want everything, you know, and I'm willing to be disappointed over and over and over again. And that's embracing the shadow, like going, I'm never going to get rid of, well, let's not say never, but I may not get rid of expectation for a long time, let's say like that. Because the teaching for you in all your relationships is going to be about that. You've got to you've got to allow yourself to be disappointed over and over and over again. You're like, oh, well, I'm disappointed in that. And then it's like, oh, wow, here comes another one. Oh, God, I'm disappointed again. But every time you realize you're disappointed, you let go of another expectation. You're like, well, that's gone now. You know, I don't expect you to feed me good food because you're not a good cook, or it's like you don't cook the food that I like. So okay,
find someone that's a chef for the next time.
Whatever it is, you know, you keep letting go of them until they're all gone. That's detachment.
Wow.
But you have to get there through the shadow. You can't sidestep the shadow. So I love that journey. And that's when you get to celebration. Celebration is when there's nothing left. You know, like the detachment is it's even a joke. Each one of the cities is a joke. You get to this joke and you go, well, you're in this transcendent state and you're both detached and yet not. You know, you're both completely detached and yet you're utterly in love. And you think, how can that be? But that is the state of unconditional love.
Yes.
Completely detached, but utterly in love.
And on that topic, I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt you there, but
no, I'm done.
The attractor sphere, you said that we attract in the exact partner that we need to work on our wound. But also, we fall in love because we meet people's cities. That's beautiful right there.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
I feel like, well, obviously we're drawing in people that have a similar or opposite core wound as us, so we can play out that lesson, that relationship. But you know, I'm currently in a moment right now where I'm opening my heart to meet and attract a new person in my life, and I'm giving myself that opportunity because I've done sort of the wounding work and that shadow work a little bit. And I feel like when we're in that process of falling in love, it's seeing the light, the divinity within another, because the CD is the highest state.
Yeah.
And when you see, like, even looking at someone's eyes, just like staying there and seeing like the divine nature within them, the universe that's in their eyes. If you actually look at someone's eyes, it looks like a galaxy. And that's exactly what it feels like. Like you're falling in love with the person's divine nature, not what they look like, not their name, not what they do for work, not, you know, who their parents are. It's literally the divinity within that person.
Absolutely. It's the soul, isn't it?
The soul.
You know, when a soul falls in love with another soul, you have an eternal relationship, you know? Because your eternal part has fallen in love with the eternal part of another. And, you know, in the Venus sequence, we call that the SQ, the spiritual quotient, like the place in us where the soul meets the soul. And then there are layers that come in, you know, so we fall in love, and then there are layers that come in, the EQ and the IQ, and the EQ is like the emotional wounding that kind of then starts to throw a cloud over that, because there's all these emotional wounds that we carry, and then they come out, and there's also mental wounds that come as well. And so there are those layers that fall over the soul that we have to then work through. So for you, with the 42 there, Gene Key, it's like, as I said, you need to work through disappointments.
Yeah. So
you're going to attract in that beautiful, glowing soul, but then at some point you're going to be disappointed. And then you're going to be disappointed again and again and again. But there's going to be beauty every time you hit that place inside you, because you're going to let it go. You'll be like, oh wow, I love you even more now. Because they're little nuggets, they're little diamonds, each one of those shadows. So it's like the great poets like Rumi and Hafiz and Kabir, and they all sing of like, or Khalil Gibran. That's a very easy to access, beautiful book, The Prophet. Where he talks about love and let love strip you back to let it wound you, let it disappoint you over and over and over again, but stay with it, stay with the journey, because you saw that soul and that soul saw you. And if you love that, if you can stay with that love, as long as there's no abuse or anything like that, then you can move through all those layers with that person.
Yeah.
And you'll get, like the salmon, you'll get back one day to that soul love. And you'll also have flashes along the way, of course, because that's grace. Grace gives us moments where, even in difficult relationships, suddenly the clouds open and you suddenly see each other's soul again, and maybe you'd forgotten for a while, and then suddenly you see it again. You're like, oh, I just remembered our love. How did I forget? And we wonder that. We're like, how the hell did I forget this?
How do we forget? I mean, has it ever happened I know you were married, and I remember in one conversation you mentioned that for a moment you're like, is this really my soulmate? And then by the time you hit a certain point in the relationship, because you fully 100% committed, I know you also said that 99% commitment is the same as 1% commitment. How do you remember that of this is like, wow, this is really my soulmate in your perspective with your marriage?
Well, I think it's there in commitment. If your energy commits 100%, then you start to move into the devotion, and that devotional energy, that the ancients call it Bhakti, is what kind of cleans you out. It's the thing that strips you back. It strips away all your layers and your expectations and all of your, shadows and fears and meannesses and all of that. So I think when you've made that commitment, it's so powerful, because it kind of bonds you eternally to that person, and you can't sort of fake that commitment. You sort of have to get there spontaneously. So I guess it's a mystery. But it's not all roses, for sure, because you forget. I still forget sometimes, and because I just drop into we drop into these holes sometimes because there are still remnants of shadows inside us, and we drop into those old patterns, and then we come out again, and we get better and better and quicker at coming out, re-emerging. I call it like rebirthing your heart. It's like you have to keep rebirthing your heart, yourself. You have to keep healing yourself. You keep being reborn, and you have to become almost like a professional at that. And the better you do it, the quicker you can come back. And so it's very rare for me now that I will get kind of overwhelmed by a shadow state that that I recognize it. I'll recognize it, and then I might need to say, I can't go there right now. I might need to say, look, I'm in it. I'm in one. Right. So there's no getting through to me. There is no point in having a conversation right now about anything.
Almost that like repression.
Maybe the laundry
nature.
Or something. But there's no point, because I'm in it. And when you're in it, it's like that person can't pull you out. Maybe a best friend or something could help you, or a therapist perhaps, or someone. But the person that's triggered it, very unlikely. So it's about you kind of then doing your own alchemy, and then coming back and going, okay, I'm out, I'm back. And that's a really great mature state to reach in a relationship. If you can do that with each other, you can learn to do that, to learn to recognize and own your own stuff. And then it prevents you from going in those loops that we get into, where you're in an argument and you're just looping back in the same old argument. You just have to stop. So you just go, stop. I'm in the loop. We're in the loop. There's no point being in the loop. We know where it goes. Just goes back round. It actually often exacerbates the wound, makes it worse.
Yeah.
So it's best to, that's a real learning. That's part of the Venus sequence learning is to learn how to disable those loops.
Yeah, and it's almost this like superpower to know what your shadow is, but it's also equally important to know that also, like, you're not going to spend the whole day just contemplating on the shadow. I heard you say also spend 10% in the shadow and then 90% in the gift and the CD. Because when we're like so deep in the shadow, like it's important to know, oh, that just came up. How can I get back into my gift? For example, for me, during these podcasts, my life's work is, I'm blanking on the number, but it's the shadow of the intellect, 62. And when I find myself going to that place of like, I need to answer this question, or I need to ask this in the most intellectual way I can, I lose it. And then, I have to just acknowledge, oh, my intellect wanted to jump in the conversation. Let me go back to the gift, which is precision. Let me speak from the heart again. So it's important to like have that balance of like, we're focused on the shadow, but also acknowledging that the gift is there always and we can tap into it whenever.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And that's where creativity and, can come in, because it can really help you pull yourself out of the pit. I really recommend that approach.
Yeah. Richard, to start driving everything home, as we would say, there's one important concept that I think it's really just pertinent to touch on, and it's that core stability, the purpose, that essence that we all carry, and acknowledging that within us. You've even mentioned like, try not to get into like these relationships if you don't have your core stability locked in, because then you'll lose yourself in the relationship. You can also learn a lot about yourself in the relationship, but going into these projects or relationship with our core stability, our essence, what can you say upon that about just the importance of having that and having the awareness of it?
Yeah, I think it's where things begin with the gene keys. If you're exploring the gene keys, you start with the activation sequence, which is part one of this whole golden path. And then the Venus, which is the love work, as we just talked about. And so having the grounding there is really important, which is basically being able to be alone with yourself and be comfortable in your own skin and be able to be a contemplative being and be able to rest in being, in your being. And, we have this kind of pressure on us to find our purpose in life. And in Gene Keys, your purpose, if you look on, anyone can look, if you don't know the work, get the Gene Keys profile, look at it. The one at the bottom is called your purpose. And there's a number in there, and that key is about your purpose. But your purpose has nothing to do with doing. It's not something you have to do in the outside world. I have to achieve this. It's not an achievement thing. It's about being. You have to be that siddhi, that whatever it is. If it's compassion, it's compassion. If it's ecstasy, it's ecstasy. That's what you're here to be. And the gift will show you how you get to that place. And the shadow will show you the thing that undermines you just being in that place. Just being with yourself, alone, all one, just you, just me, this, now, and the beauty of this, and the pain of this sometimes. But being able to be with your pain. And that, so core stability is about having that grounding so that you know that state of being and you can access that state of being. And yes, you can get pulled off it, you can get pulled away from it, but you'll soon come back to it like a spring, back to my beings. Someone might pull you off a relationship, an event, something, and then you lose yourself, but then you come right back and you build that connection. People can do that through practice, through spiritual practice, through prayer, through contemplation, meditation, yoga, all those things that bring you back to your core and your center. So you have to have that core stability so that when you go into a relationship where entanglement always occurs, you can disentangle yourself from those patterns and come back to your core stability.
Yeah. Take your power.
Because if you don't have that in the first place, you're just a tangled net. Your two wounds tangled up with each other. And those wounds don't have any understanding of each other or even of themselves. So you have to understand some of your wound yourself. And that's where it begins. This is where the Gene Keys journey begins. Like, let's look at the first big challenge in your life. The first thing you learn when you come to the Gene Keys in the profile is like, challenge. What's my biggest challenge? That's the first thing you learn. My biggest challenge is this, and then you begin to look at that and you go, okay, like my biggest challenge is doubt. Shadow of doubt.
I have that twice.
Okay. So have a look and see what your biggest challenge is. It's the one called evolution, sphere of evolution, the second sphere in your sequence. And that tends to be the one that kind of comes back over and over and over and over again. For me, it's doubt. It's self-doubt, that can undermine one in so many situations. And then you have to become friends with that shadow. You have to make friends with it so that it doesn't undermine you. And that's where you deepen your core stability, and you can have breakthroughs that enable you to really get down to the base of yourself, where you feel really comfortable and self-actualized, and your self-esteem returns. And when you get to those places, then you're really ready for a healthy relationship. And I'm not saying you have to do that work and then, you can do it in your relationship, but it's an inner work. It's a solo work. Only you can do it. So it's about connecting deep in your being with your heart and with this line that runs through the core. Yeah. So anyone can do it.
Man, Richard, it's been a journey. We like to end off every single episode with a final segment called the Final Trio. And these are personalized rapid fire questions you can answer in any way that you want, whatever comes up for you in your heart. But before that, I know, as you said, the Gene Keys literally is taking on a life of its own. The work that you've done in your life is beginning to be more seen, more heard around the world. Where would you send people to connect further with this body of wisdom, this transmission? I highly recommend this book is, I can't even begin to explain what it's done for me. But where would you send people? What do you have upcoming? I know you have some live events that you don't normally do. Where would you send people to connect with you?
Yeah, I would invite people to, first of all, visit the website, obviously, genekeys.com. And there are journeys in there. I mean, there's a lot in that site. You can just go follow your intuition into that site. And there's also a new to the Gene Keys section. You'll see it's very clear. And you can click in there and it starts you on your journey. You might want to get your profile, your Gene Keys profile, and begin to explore that. And then our most popular thing is, as I said, it's called the activation sequence. It's like an online self-study course. And you can start with that. But also we have a massive community around the world. So, as you come into the courses, you come into connection with others as well, because there are forums and places you can connect and calls and things like that. And so that's a really nice way to come in. I do have some events coming up. One major one in May, and which is a day in Colorado. May the 17th, and that's if you can get a ticket, well done. Because
we'll publish
haven't been
this
out for
before.
a while. But we're going to stream it as well, so there'll be streaming tickets, so you can enjoy it as well that way. And we do online things a lot. So there's a lot of online self-study journeys. There's also, you'll find a lot of my stuff on YouTube, a lot of free things on YouTube. So you can kind of get your Gene Keys education in a way, just from all that stuff. Yeah. And books, some wonderful books. Gene Keys book itself, that's a deep end book. The little tiny one called Art of Contemplation is, if you want a gentle, soft beginning, that's a wonderful way to begin. And there's a little online course that goes with that as well. It's very affordable. So that's a nice place to begin. And just come into our community, come into our forums, come in, there's lots of different doorways you can come in, and we're improving and making changes to the site all the time. So I think, over the coming months, especially there's going to be some really good new doors for newcomers. So just come in. Oh, and one more thing is we have a weekly, it's not a newsletter. It's a weekly love letter called The Pulse.
Ooh.
And what it does is it tracks the gene key of the moment each week. It's about 6 days actually. And in there are like beautiful little droplets of insight each week that just kind of flow through and little audios on the key of the moment so that you can listen and people take it in all kinds of ways when they're driving or when they're running or when they're late at night listening or it's really nice way of imbibing the gene keys or as an audio. But the Pulse is great, and you can when you get your profile, you can sign up to those. You just click that little box that we never usually click. And it says, the one that says, "Oh, I'm not going to click. It's a newsletter. I don't want that." But if you click it, you'll get this love letter, and you can always unsubscribe, of course. But it's a really beautifully curated letter from me and my team to the world that we put a lot of love into, and a lot of really lovely resources. So it's a nice way to stay in touch with the community and what's going on in the Gene Keys. And we're also now featuring members of the community as well around the world and different languages that are exploring the Gene Keys. So it's exciting. It's something to become part of.
Yes.
So come and join us.
Yeah, we're obviously going to link everything in the show notes in the description if you're on YouTube here. And yeah, Richard, I just want to acknowledge, because you can feel the intentionality and love that goes into everything that you guys put out. I know you have a powerful, small team, and you guys are really making strides in the collective consciousness. The first question we have for the final trio is, if you could describe what the new human, let's say even the children that are coming into the world right now, what they're embodying, what they may even look like physically, spiritually, what would you begin to describe this new human? How would you describe them?
Well, like the old new human is like the Buddha or the Christ, one of those. It's like the Buddha is often presented sitting in a sitting position, and we won't go into Christ, right? But the new human, I see it as standing tall. So I would say it's like a standing being. It's standing on its 2 feet, proud with its spine erect and powerful, and it's moving. It's fluid and flowing and dynamic and creative and filled with vigor and childlike play. And that's the new human. It's not a sitting, serious, transcendent, great sage. It's a child. It's an eternal child. That's how I see it.
That's powerful. The second one is, what do the numbers 49 and 55 mean to you?
Well, if you explore the Gene Keys, that's a heck of a journey. But if those 2 Gene Keys form a codon that is called the ring of the whirlwind. These are called codon rings, and they're aspects of the keys that code for shift in global consciousness in different ways. And that particular one, each one of them has a kind of relationship to the arcana of the tarot. There are 22 of them. And that one has a relationship to the tower, the card called the tower in the tarot is number 16. And the tower is a kind of catastrophic falling apart of an old paradigm in order that a new one can be born. So even though when you see the tower in the tarot, you think, oh, that's a negative card, it's actually one of the most positive cards, because it's about, this whole thing I've been talking about in this podcast, like this bright light that has to burst out of the darkness. And that's what it really means. That's what those 2 Gene Keys denote, this rebirth of a new consciousness rooted in freedom.
What does freedom mean to you?
Ultimately, freedom is bliss. freedom is bliss, because, that's the next phase of our entire evolution, and we've been learning from suffering, right? And suffering is deep and beautiful and painful and rich, and it has layers and layers and so many lessons and learnings for us. And we've almost exhausted it, right? And when we've exhausted it, which is soon, the next universe opens for us, and the next universe is bliss. And you might think bliss is just one thing, but bliss is as rich and wide and infinite as suffering. Bliss has so many layers and vibrations and frequencies and colors and sounds, and so we get to explore an eon of bliss. And that's freedom.
I've never been so excited. Every time I hear you give this poetic vision of what we're living through right now, it just fills me with optimism, with hope. And this last question, hopefully it's not the last. I would love to continue these conversations, Richard. But we call this the time capsule question. This is a question that we ask every guest on the show. And it requires us to travel a little bit into the future, which I know you're very fond of. And if we're looking down 10, 15, 20 years down the line, and you are given the opportunity to have a time capsule personalized to you, that you could insert anything beyond your wildest dreams into this time capsule, knowing that this time capsule is going to be opened by the next generation of leaders, the new humans that are entering right now. And if you could leave anything in that time capsule for them to open and to allow them to have some sort of guidance, empowerment toward this new earth that's being created right now. This could be anything from a book, a vibration, a teaching, a philosophy, an animal, whatever you could think of that symbolizes this new era, this new epoch for humanity. What would you put into this time capsule?
It's such a nice question. I'd like time to contemplate it. I will go on contemplating it after this, and I'll probably come up with another answer. But for now, since we've been talking about gene keys, and I want to keep things practical, and I'd like to actually help people, I would put in there my little book on contemplation. I just pop it in on the seat, and then I'd close the door, and because it's under 100 pages, but in there are. If one has a masterpiece in one's life, I would consider that my masterpiece, and it's because it's short and simple and clear, and it just gives you the very simple essence of how to deal with what's right in front of you, especially when things get difficult. So I that might sound a bit egocentric, but I want to be helpful to people, and so. I think that would be a very helpful thing for the children of the future because of its simplicity.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of other things I could think of, and clever things probably, but let's be practical. And I hope that any of you that hear this, you might get that little book, and you could read it in a day. But its secrets are kind of eternal. They're not even mine. They've come down the ages and been handed on from person to person and teacher to teacher, and to keep it simple is like a real gift, to get things down to their quintessence, and that's what I try to do in that book anyway.
And I had an intuition that you were going to respond with that, because even our generation, I feel like contemplation is becoming a lost art, where we have all the world's information at a fingertip. We're spending in between, statistics say between 7 to 9, 10 hours a day on our phone, on social media. And we're not giving ourselves the time to contemplate our life, certain things. This, for me, it's that space in the morning, the meditation, where just closing my eyes, giving myself silence, but it's not really a meditation. It sort of becomes a contemplation. And then throughout the day, an insight will come up. And I know that's literally how you wrote the whole of Gene Keys, is contemplating that initial download that you had. And yeah, for the philosophical clever answer, we could even have a whole podcast called The Time Capsule, Richard's Time Capsule, and explore that even deeper.
Yeah.
And just to like hone in on the contemplation, is there one specific go-to contemplative question that you would leave people with today?
Well, as you probably know, Emilio, the kind of essence of contemplation is the art of pausing, to be able to pause regularly throughout the day, to give yourself the gift of pauses. And pauses can be so luxurious when you begin to pump them into your day. And that's what gives space for the contemplative insights to drop, so you're creating magic when you pause. And so I would invite people to ask themselves the question, like, how shall I pause today? How often have I paused? How can I pause each day? And by the way, I'm bringing out a little app soon called Triple Flame app that will be out very soon. And what it does is it gives you a bing every 3 hours on the 3, 6, 9, 12 of the clock. And you're asked to just pause for 3 minutes. You're invited to pause. You can do it different. You can do it longer or shorter, but 3 minutes is what's called the triple flame. And that's not very much, but that very simple little practice is really powerful. And you can pause while you're in movement as well, or when you're driving, or it just means you carry on doing what you're doing, but you're doing it with absolute awareness. And that then begins to create a rhythm, a triple rhythm in your daily life. And it's really nice, it's really nice. And it's nice to share. And on the app, there's a little thing that says how many other people are pausing right now, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. And yeah, the name of this podcast is called Just Tap In. And it really goes to show that simplicity of giving yourself moments to just tap in, look within yourself and see what treasures, what gems lie inside when you give yourself those spaces. So this podcast, I know, was a breath of fresh air for people, a moment to tap in. I know they'll be digesting this for, the days, the months, the years to come. Always feel free to come back to this conversation when you need a reminder, and follow Richard's wisdom even deeper. Richard, thank you from the heart, brother, for accepting this invitation, for coming on and sharing your light, your greatness. I feel such an honor to be here with you, and hopefully develop a lifelong friendship and keep learning from you, because you're bringing in some powerful stuff into humanity. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Emilio.